Curtiss P-36 Hawk, also known as the Hawk 75M, was an American-designed fighter of the 1930s and 40s. The plane was designed by Don R. Berlin, who brought the design to Curtiss-Wright Corporation, and they were able to build a test plane by 1935, and after 3 years of testing and redesigning, it began mass production in 1938. Many of the models were purchased by the United States during World War II, and were sent to its allies as part of the Lend-Lease program Roosevelt started. It was one of the first new generations of combat aircraft, a sleek monoplane design making extensive use of new materials in its construction and powered by a new powerful radial engine. But it was obsolete on the onset of World War II and best known as the predecessor of the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. The P-36 saw only limited combat with the United States Air Forces, but the P-36 was used most extensively by the French Air Force, both during the Battle of France and by the Vichy French, and was used against the French forces in the Franco-Thai War. It was also used by the British, and it was known by the Mohawk, and also by the Chinese. Several dozen also fought in the Finnish Air Force against Soviet aircraft. With around 1,000 built, the P-36 was a major commercial success for Curtiss-Wright. The specs. Originally, when produced, the P-36 had a Wright XR1670-5 radial engine, developing 900 horsepower for the plane. And typically, the United States Armed Air Corps armaments for the standard P-36 was one .30 caliber and one .50 caliber firing through the propeller. Also typical of the time was the total absence of cockpit armor or self-sealing fuel tanks. Self-sealing fuel tanks are tanks that were lined with rubber and various cloths when pierced by gunfire would expand around the hole, limiting the amount of fuel leakage. Goodyear chemist James Murrell was credited with the invention of the tank in 1941. The invention was put to good use in the Pacific. Our planes could take much more damage than the lightly armored Japanese Zero. Fuel lines were also coated in the self-sealing to ensure minimal leaks. The tanks could withstand 50 caliber shells, also on occasion 20mm cannon shells. The new tanks were heavy, leading to the P-36's low carrying capacity, but considering it was not a fighter bomber, it's understandable. The distinctive landing gear, which rotated 90 degrees to fold the main wheels flat into the thin trailing portion of the wing, resting atop the lower ends of the main gear struts when retracted, was actually a Boeing patented design for which Curtiss had to pay royalties. The wingspan was 37 feet and a height of 8.5 feet. The empty weight was 4,500 pounds, and when fueled up was 5,500 pounds. And its max takeoff weight was about 6,000 pounds, meaning if it were to be fitted with bombs, it could only carry about 150 pounds. And, that's even pushing it. But since it was more of a straight fighter, not many carried bombs. The plane's max speed was 313 miles per hour, and its cruise was 270. Its maximum range was 860 miles at 200 miles per hour. Its service ceiling was 32,000 feet. Later in the war, the plane was fitted with two .50 caliber machine guns firing through the prop and 2 to 4 mounted on each wing. The United States use of the aircraft. The aircraft service history was marred by numerous teething problems with the engine exhaust, skin buckling over the landing gear, and weak points in the airframe, restricting the performance envelope. By the time these issues were resolved, the P-36 was considered obsolete and was repurposed to train new pilots. The only fighting the U.S. pilots did in this aircraft was during the attack on Pearl Harbor. 5 P-36s, previously delivered by the USS Enterprise months earlier, were able to take off and credited with shooting down 2 Japanese Zeros, but unfortunately at the cost of one of the pilots' lives. Survivors. Over 1,000 planes were built, but only 3 remain today, either being scrapped or shot down. The 38-001, the first P-36 to be delivered to the Air Corps, is on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. It is displayed in the markings of P-36A, flown by Lieutenant Phil Rasmussen during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Another complete and restored Hawk 75M survives in the Royal Thai Air Force Museum. The serial number is unknown. A French H-75C-1 has been restored to flying condition and is owned by the Fighter Collection at Duxford, United Kingdom. It has been flown as showing in French camouflage with 2 different markings on each side, showing both periods of the fighter's life. Also, a Hawk 75A-6, a Finnish aircraft, was being restored in New Zealand, but the effort had been put on hold. A photograph of the preserved Axis on the Preserved Axis aircraft website shows that it was a Finnish blue FAF swastika on the tail. Obviously fighting against us. I don't know how that plane got there to the Finnish. Stay tuned to my new channel to learn more about these interesting planes. I plan on posting a new video once a week. My next video will be the P-40 Warhawk. It saw extensive use in the Pacific and in Europe, as long as also the British used it. Great aircraft. It was the successor to the P-36. You can't get better than that. Alright, subscribe.